Stampers, this is Marie Bennett with the first episode of Tools of the Trade, and in this episode I'm going to show you the very basics of getting started with making a greeting card. The first tool you will need is a paper cutter, and I'm using the Stampin' Up! Paper trimmer, and as you can see, it has a grid right here that helps you line the paper up so that you can make a nice straight cut. Then it has a cutting bar. This plastic piece here is used to keep the paper in place while you cut. And then it has two blades. The darker one, which is kind of a dark gray color, has a cutting blade on it, and it cuts right in this groove, cuts the paper right in the groove. The second blade is a scoring blade, and it's a light gray, and what it's used for is just to make a line on the paper that helps you make a good fold when you're folding the card in half, or if you're doing a fancy fold, it helps you make a good fold. This paper cutter has an arm that swings out like that. You just pull it out from the side, and it measures paper up to 14.5 inches. And then on the other side of this cutting strip here, it will measure paper up to 1.25 inches. See this one? That means 1 inch, 1.25 inches. When you make a greeting card, most cards come in a standard size, and they can open this way like a book, or they could open this way like a tent. Most of the cards that we will be making will open this way like a book, and the basic size of the card is the same. So most cards that we will be making are 8.5 inches by 5.5 inches. But you can't buy paper that is 8.5 by 5.5. Can you hear my Yorkie growling at me in the background? She never lets me do anything without growling at me. Anyway, most paper comes in this size, 8.5 by 11. And so the first thing you have to do when you're making greeting cards is make the paper the size you need for the card. Now, half of this sheet of paper, if it's 11 inches from here to here, then half of the distance is 5.5 inches. So on the paper cutter, you see the number 5 right here. See where it says 5? And then the next size is 6. Well, this line right in the middle here is 5.5. So we're going to line our paper up at 5.5 inches, the edge of the paper. And there's a line for us to stay on when we make this cut. Okay, so you can see that I have lined it up at 5.5 inches. And you can see that it has kind of a gray solid ridge here. It's kind of a stop. If you push the paper up against that ridge, it will stay put. And then we use this cutting strip bar here to hold the paper down. So I'm going to put the cutter back down on the table, and I'm looking to make sure I'm following the line all the way down at 5.5 inches. Then I'm using this dark gray cutting blade, and all I have to do is gently push up to the top, and it has cut my paper in 2 equal pieces. If I put them together like that, I can see they're the same. So this is the basic foundation of a greeting card, 5.5 by 8.5. Now I'm going to want to fold this paper so that it will make a card. So I know that the distance here is 8.5 inches, and half of that is 4.25. So I'm going to put this edge of the paper on the 4.25 mark. See how I put it under here? That kind of holds it in place. And if you look, here's 4, and there's 4 marks, 1, 2, 3, 4 before you get to 5. So at the first mark, that's 1/4, 4 1/4, and I'm going to put it here. And you can see that when I quit, I have the cutting blade at the bottom and the scoring blade at the top. So the cutting blade is out of my way because I don't want to accidentally use the cutting blade when I'm trying to score. I'm going to use this light gray scoring blade. So I put it down flat on the table, check to make sure it's lined up on the line, and then I'm going to gently push 2 times down and back on the card. And then when I've done that, I don't know if you'll be able to, there you can kind of see the scoring line. What it did was it made a little groove on the paper, and that's the line I'm going to fold on. So when I put it like this, it very easily folds the card. And I didn't have to line up the ends or the edges or anything. I just folded right on that line that I made to cut the paper exactly in half. Now, you can see this card doesn't want to stay flat, so I need another tool. And of course I didn't have the tool handy, so I had to go get it. This is called a bone folder, and it's used to fold, to crease the edge where you made this score mark. Then you just take your bone folder and push it along the edge, and see how nice and flat that card lays now. So those are the first 2 tools that you will use in getting your card, your basic card foundation, ready to go. If you are working as part of a team that's putting together a card project, one of your jobs will be to get the card foundations cut. And so you will become very familiar with cutting this full-size sheet of cardstock in half the long way at 5.5 inches. And I recommend that you cut several card bases, and especially with the white cardstock, because you will be making a lot of white cards and you will always use these card foundations, so it's a good idea to have a supply on hand. So if it's your job to make the card foundations, you will cut it in half at 5.5 inches, and after you get all of the paper cut that you want to cut, you'll go back and score it using this light gray blade at 4.25 inches. Just like that. And then you don't need to fold the card, because a folded card takes up twice as much space for storage. So if you're preparing card bases to be used later, you just need to cut and score. And then when you store them, you can store them flat like this. One of the things that makes handmade greeting cards interesting is that you're able to take pieces of paper and layer them to create depth. And if you look at most greeting cards you buy in the like at Walmart or a stationery store, they're just an image printed on paper, and so there aren't very many levels to those cards. So when you make handmade greeting cards, you have the ability to add interest and beauty to your card by arranging separate individual pieces rather than pictures. So here's some cards, and you can see how things have been added to the card to make it more interesting. In this card, all of the images were printed on the top layer, but there's more than one layer on the card. One more card. So if it's your job to cut the card bases, and you're the person using the trimmer for whatever project your group is working on, another size that you're going to need to know how to cut is this facing layer right here. And if you look at this card, you can see that there's just a little border all the way around the card of blue. This is called Blue Lagoon, this color. And on the inside, the card is blue, or on the outside you see mostly the white layer. Well, this layer is a standard size. So while you're cutting the standard size card bases, you can also cut the standard size layers for the outside of the card, and then later you just take that blank and you can add embellishments. That's what this embossing right here is, an embellishment. This little diamond is an embellishment. So you can add those things, but the base is going to be another piece of plain white cardstock. You don't have to use white. You can use really any piece of cardstock or lighter weight paper called designer series paper. That's what these papers are. So the basic measurement for this piece here, this white piece, and also for the blue piece on this card, and for the peach colored piece on this card, and for the lighter layer here, which really started out as a piece of white paper, but I stamped flowers all around and kind of made my own printed paper design. They all started out the same size. So the size you need to cut for that is, you need to make 2 cuts. You need to trim a 1/2 inch off the edge and a 1/2 inch off the end. So the first 2 cuts are going to be 8 inches. We'll put this on the 8-inch mark and trim that off. And then we want it to be 10.5 because the paper is 8.5 by 11. So if we take off a 1/2 inch, that makes it 8. And if we take off another 1/2 inch, that makes it 10.5. So I trim that off. Okay. Now this piece of paper is 10.5 inches long by 8 inches wide, and I want to cut it so that it's 5.25 inches long, because that's half of 10.5. So 5.25, and it's 8 inches wide, so I want to cut it in half, which makes it 4. So I'll cut it at 4. And then out of that one piece of paper, I have cut 4 basic layers for the layering of the card. 4 of them. And I can use these to do lots of things with. Like, let me see, let's go back to this card right here. I cut this piece of Blue Lagoon out and layered it over the top of a white card. But I could have cut a piece of Blue Lagoon card and layered it with white, and that just makes it more interesting. Alright, so if your job is cutting, then when you cut the layers, you need to remember the basic measurements. The first time you cut it, I would cut, if I were doing it, I would take as many sheets of paper as I plan on cutting. Let's say 5, because I want to make 20 cards. So I would take my 5 sheets of paper and cut off 1/2 inch and make them all 8 inches wide. So that's 1, 2. I'm lining it up at the 8-inch line every time. Oops. I'm bumping it up against this gray bumper. 2. 3. Oops. 4. 5. Okay, so now I have 5 pieces of paper that are 8 inches wide by 11 inches long. So I'm going to turn them the other way. All 5 pieces need to be cut to 10.5 now. So I'm going to put it at 10.5. The reason I do it this way is it helps me to avoid making so many mistakes. I know that all 5 of these need to go to 10.5 inches. So if I do all of the 10.5 inch cuts at one time before I move on to the next cut, then I only have one thing to think about, and that's 10.5 inches. Okay, there's my last piece to cut at 10.5. Now I want to cut them in half this way. They're 10.5. I need them to be 5 1/4. So I line it up at 5 1/4. And until you get used to making these measurements, you'll want to be sure that you ask your teacher or one of the classroom helpers to check your work before you cut, because once you make the cut, you can't make it bigger if you cut it too small. So these are all going to be 5 1/4 inches wide. And that's 5 pieces of paper. Alright, so now I only have one more cut to make on each of these pieces. But now I have 10 pieces because I had 5 and I cut them in half. So now I've got 10. So they need to be cut at 4. Half of 8 is 4. So I'm going to cut it, all of these at 4 inches. And notice how I put it under this little plastic bar every time, because the blade cuts between the plastic and this thing. Okay, I'm not going to make you watch me cut all of these, so I'm going to turn this off and come back with the next step. Okay, so now I have all of my top layers cut at 4 inches by 5 1/4, and I have all of my card bases cut at 8.5 by 5 1/2 and scored at 4 1/4. So this is, if I were the person doing the trimming, using the trimmer today, this basic part of my job would be done. So the next thing I need to do is put my tools away. So to put away the Stampin' Trimmer, you will need to pull this arm until it clicks in place. And when if you look at this arm on the bottom, there's a little foot. Like, well, I didn't show that to you very well. Okay, there's a little foot, and it's kind of clicked into to the lower position. But when you use it, you need to click it like this, and then that gives support. That gives support to that arm, so if you push on it, it won't break off of the trimmer. When you're done, then you need to take that foot and click it down into position, and then it's out of the way, and you can just push on the arm and close it. This piece will break also. When you carry it around, it has a tendency to flop up and down. So it also has a lock. At the top there's a little thing, and you just slide it like that. Just clicks into place. Pull it toward this dark arm. So it just slides back and forth. Now that bar won't come up. So your trimmer is now closed and ready to put it away wherever it is your teacher wants you to store this. Okay, the next thing you need to do is clean up your scraps, because when we made the smaller outer cards, when we made these smaller pieces, we trimmed a 1/2 inch off the edge and off the bottom. Well, these are useful. They really shouldn't be thrown away until you get a huge pile. You might want to start weeding them out, but you can use them to make trims for cards. You can use them to put like thank you or hello greetings on here, and so it's a good idea to save some of these. Then when you get enough, then you wouldn't need to save them anymore. Okay, that's the end of episode 1, where we talked about the trimmer and the bone folder. Episode 2, we're going to talk about the stamps themselves. The stamps are what create the images on the paper. So join me next time for Tools of the Trade, episode 2.